Snow fell thick enough to obscure the firing range markers at 50 meters. Private Emma Halstead's breath turned to white vapor, freezing against the fabric pulled across her face. Her fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago, but the cold wasn't what made them shake. "I need to see your failure logs," Cross said. "No introduction, no pleasantries. Neither do we. But if you slow us down, if you compromise the mission, if you do anything except exactly what Commander Cross tells you, there won't be a second chance. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Get your cold weather gear. We insert at 0200. The mission brief was sparse on details and heavy on implications. A high-value intelligence asset had missed 2 scheduled check-ins from a remote research station 90 kilometers north of Fort Richardson. Satellite imagery showed unusual activity. Communications were down. A winter storm was moving in, expected to hit full force within 12 hours. A standard extraction team would go in with overwhelming force and technology. But the terrain made helicopter insertion impossible in the storm, and ground vehicles couldn't navigate the mountain passes in whiteout conditions, which meant a small team, moving fast, operating light. "We have a 6-hour window," Cross explained, pointing at the topographical map. Locate the asset, extract, and get to the evacuation point before the storm makes movement impossible." "What if he's already compromised?" Garrett asked. "Then we confirm status and destroy any sensitive materials. Either way, we don't leave evidence." Emma studied the map. The route Cross had marked made sense tactically, following the low ground, using natural cover, but it crossed 3 major avalanche zones, and with the snow depth increasing, those routes would become death traps. Monroe hesitated. "Sir, those are." She raised her hand hesitantly. Morrison glared at her. "This isn't class, private." "Let her speak," Cross said. "Sir, the route through the Eastern Valley, those slopes are heavily loaded. With new snow and wind, the avalanche risk is extreme. That's why we're moving before the storm hits full force. The storm's already starting. I saw the cloud formation when I walked over here. We have less time than the weather report indicates." The room went silent. Cross looked at her carefully. "How much less?" "Maybe 3 hours. 4 at most. The wind patterns are already shifting. Satellites show." "Now, Sergeant, satellites show what was happening when the image was taken," Emma said, then immediately regretted interrupting. "Sir." "Sorry, sir." But Cross was looking at the map again. "Alternative route?" Emma stepped forward, tracing a path with her finger. "The northern ridge. It's longer, but the terrain is more stable. The wind will be worse, but we can use the rocks for shelter if we need to." Garrett shook his head. "That route adds 2 hours. Not if we cut through here." Emma indicated a section the map showed as impassable forest. "This is old growth. The canopy is thick enough to reduce snow accumulation. We can move faster there than on open ground." Morrison leaned in. "You've seen this terrain?" "No, sir. But I've seen enough similar areas to know how they behave." "That's not good enough." Cross made a decision. "We'll prep for both routes. Make the call when we're on the ground. Gear up. We move in 4 hours." The insertion went smoothly. 2 vehicles took them as far as the roads remained passable. Then they moved on foot, carrying 70-pound packs through darkness and increasing snowfall. 10 minutes later, Emma stood in a briefing room that smelled of burnt coffee and old wood. Commander Cross sat across from her, a manila folder open on the table between them. He hadn't spoken since bringing her inside. Emma moved in the middle of the formation, feeling the weight of distrust from the operators around her. They didn't talk to her, didn't acknowledge her except to check that she was keeping pace. She was. Barely. The physical demands of moving through deep snow with a full load were different from the standardized exercises at Fort Richardson. Here, the team set a relentless pace, and there was no allowance for struggle. You kept up or you fell behind. Emma kept up. 3 hours in, they reached the decision point. The valley route Cross had originally planned stretched ahead, dark and quiet. The wind had increased significantly, but the way was clear. Emma looked up at the ridgeline. She couldn't see the top through the snow, but she could feel the instability in the air, the weight of accumulated powder waiting to move. "Sir," she said quietly. Cross raised his fist, halting the team. "Talk to me, Halstead. That valley is going to slide. Maybe not now, but within the next 2 hours. If we're in it when it goes, can you guarantee that?" Finally, he looked up. "No, sir, but I wouldn't bet my life on it being stable." Garrett moved up. "Commander, we're already behind schedule. If we take the long route, we'll barely make extraction before the storm hits full force. If we take the valley route, and she's right, we don't make extraction at all." Morrison's voice came through the tactical radio. I'll push ahead, scout the valley, see if I can assess the risk. He moved forward, disappearing into the snow. 3 minutes passed. 5. Then a sound like distant thunder rolled down from the mountains. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Urgent. Slope failure, slope failure. I'm clear, but the lower valley is completely buried, at least 15 feet deep. Cross looked at Emma. The northern route. You're on point. You see the terrain better than we do. Lead us through. You're not going to pass this course, he said. Each word deliberate, final. The metrics they use here don't measure what you can actually do. The weight of that responsibility nearly crushed her. These were operators with decades of combined experience, and Cross was putting their lives in her hands based on a guess about wind patterns and snow depth. Move, Private, Cross said. We're on the clock. Emma swallowed, adjusted her pack, and started up the ridge. The northern route was exactly as terrible as Emma had predicted. The wind hit them like a physical force, driving snow horizontally, cutting visibility to arm's length. The grade was steep enough that they had to use hands and knees in places, pulling themselves up through rocks and frozen brush, but the snow depth was manageable, and the route was stable. Emma moved with increasing confidence, finding handholds in the darkness, choosing paths that minimized exposure to wind. Behind her, the SEAL team followed without comment, trusting her navigation, even though none of them would have admitted it aloud. They crested the ridge 2 hours later, exhausted and half frozen. Below them, barely visible through the storm, lights flickered at the research station. Cross pulled out binoculars with thermal imaging, multiple heat signatures, at least 4 inside the building, 2 outside. Can't confirm if they're friendly or hostile. Asset was traveling alone, Garrett noted. 4 inside means either he has company or we have a problem. They moved down the slope toward the station, using the terrain for cover. Emma stayed back now, watching the operators shift into combat mode. This was their expertise, not hers. Emma's throat tightened. Sir, I can improve. 50 meters from the building, Morrison signaled contact. 2 figures outside the station, armed, scanning the perimeter. Definitely not research staff. Cross made the tactical assessment quickly. Hostile force has secured the station. Asset status unknown. We go in hard and fast. Garrett, Morrison, take the sentries. Peters, Kowalski, breach the front entrance. I'll take the back with Halstead. Sir? Emma said. I'm not. You're my backup. Stay close, stay quiet, do what I tell you. They split up, moving through the storm in coordinated silence. Emma followed Cross around the perimeter, trying to match his movements, feeling completely out of her depth. Then everything went wrong. The back door exploded outward, 2 figures bursting into the snow with weapons raised. Cross engaged immediately, dropping the first one with 2 rapid shots. The second one returned fire, forcing them into cover behind a generator shed. Radio traffic erupted. Multiple hostiles exiting the front were engaged. Sentries are down, but we've got reinforcements coming from the tree line. Asset secured, but he's in bad shape, needs immediate medical. You don't need to improve. Cross pushed the folder toward her. You need to stop trying to be something you're not. Cross looked at Emma. The extraction point is 300 meters north. Can you get there from here? Sir, I'm not leaving. Not asking you to leave. I need you to mark the best route because I can't see shit in this storm and we're going to be carrying a wounded man. Emma looked out into the whiteout, then back at Cross. I can do that. She moved. The training she'd failed at Fort Richardson had focused on speed and endurance. This required something different. Careful observation, reading the subtle signs of terrain beneath the snow, finding the path of least resistance. Emma marked the route with chemical light sticks, small green glows barely visible through the storm. She worked fast, aware that the firefight behind her was intensifying, that every second mattered. She'd placed 5 markers when she heard the noise. 2 more hostiles, moving up from the tree line, trying to flank the SEAL team's position. They hadn't seen her yet, but they would in seconds. The Fort Richardson Advanced Winter Combat Course ran for 8 weeks every year, January through February, when the Alaskan interior turned hostile enough to simulate genuine survival conditions. 200 soldiers entered. Historically, 30% washed out. Emma had never fired a weapon in combat. Her rifle qualification scores had been barely passing. She'd frozen on the range at Fort Richardson, unable to compensate for wind and cold. But she wasn't on a training range now. She dropped to one knee, brought her rifle up, and fired 3 rounds. The first 2 went wide. The third took the lead hostile in the leg. dropping him into the snow. The second hostile turned toward her, weapon rising. Emma didn't think. She just fired, working the trigger the way her brother had taught her years ago on a civilian range in Oregon. Smooth pressure, don't anticipate the recoil, follow through. The hostile went down. Her hands were shaking. Her ears rang from the shots. But there was no time to process it. "Halstead," Cross's voice on the radio. "Status. 2 hostiles down near the tree line. Route is marked. Fall back to the station, now." She ran back through her own light markers, legs burning, lungs screaming in the frozen air. At the station, the team had consolidated, the asset being carried by Morrison and Kowalski. The man was barely conscious, bleeding from a head wound. Emma had arrived with high marks from basic training at Fort Jackson, temperate climate, standard obstacles, textbook execution. She'd ranked 7th in her platoon, good enough to qualify for specialized training, good enough to think she belonged here. "Let's move," Cross ordered. They followed Emma's marked route, pushing through the storm with hostile forces somewhere behind them. The chemical lights glowed like breadcrumbs through hell, leading them north. 15 minutes later, they reached the extraction point just as a Black Hawk descended through the storm, the pilot performing an insanely difficult landing in near-zero visibility. They loaded the wounded asset, the team piling in after. Cross grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the helicopter. "Good work, Private," he said, the words nearly lost in the rotor wash. They lifted off into the white chaos, leaving the storm and the hostiles behind. The flight back to Fort Richardson took 40 minutes. No one spoke except to coordinate with the medic treating the asset, who turned out to be a CIA analyst who'd been compromised by a Russian intelligence cell operating out of an abandoned mining facility. Emma sat near the rear of the helicopter, still processing what had happened. She'd killed 2 people. She'd led a SEAL team through a whiteout. She'd been part of a successful classified operation. She'd also completely failed winter warfare school 12 hours ago. When they landed, the asset was rushed to the base medical facility under armed guard. The SEAL team moved to a secure debriefing room. Emma followed, unsure if she was still part of this or if she'd be dismissed now that the mission was over. She dropped to one knee for the 3rd time that morning, mud and half-melted slush soaking through her fatigues. Blood seeped from a gash on her shin where she'd clipped the obstacle wall. The whistle blew sharp and final, echoing across the frozen training grounds. Alaska proved otherwise. Cross stopped her at the door. "Wait outside. I'll call you in." She stood in the hallway for 90 minutes, exhausted, still wearing her frozen gear, trying to process the chaos of the last 24 hours. Finally, Cross emerged. "The team wants you to know," he said carefully, "that you performed adequately." Emma blinked. "Adequately? From operators like them, that's the highest praise you'll ever receive." Cross almost smiled. "Garrett specifically noted that your route selection probably saved lives. Morrison confirmed your shots on the 2 hostiles were clean. Peters said you kept pace better than some qualified soldiers he's worked with, but I failed out of training." "Yes, you did. And that's what the record will show." Emma felt something break inside her. After everything, she was still just another washout. Cross continued. "The official record will show that you were removed from winter warfare school for failure to meet standards. You'll be reassigned to regular infantry, likely a garrison position somewhere warm. Week 1, she'd fallen behind during the 12-mile ruck march through knee-deep snow. Her stride was wrong for the terrain, her pack distribution inadequate for the shifting weight of ice accumulation. She'd finished 40 minutes after the cutoff. The unofficial record will show that you participated in a classified operation and performed well. That record will follow you. And when the right opportunity comes up, when there's a unit that needs someone who can read terrain instead of just run through it, your name will surface. What kind of opportunity? I can't tell you that. I can tell you that the skill set you have, the ability to navigate by observation, to read environments instead of just following GPS coordinates, that's becoming rare and valuable." Emma looked at him. "So what do I do now?" "You go back to your barracks. You pack your gear. You take your reassignment without complaint, and you wait. For how long? However long it takes." The mission report was filed as classified, accessible only to personnel with specific clearances. Private Emma Halstead's name appeared in exactly 1 line. Additional support personnel, performed adequately, no commendations. Her official military record showed her washout from winter warfare school, followed by reassignment to Fort Stewart, Georgia, where she would spend the next 8 months in a supply battalion, processing equipment requisitions. Week 2, rifle qualification. The cold made her fingers stiff, her breathing uneven. She'd managed passing scores on stationary targets but failed the moving drills. In the wind, with snowfall cutting visibility to 30 meters, she couldn't compensate for drift fast enough. No one at Fort Stewart knew about Alaska. No one knew about the SEAL team, the extraction, the hostiles she'd killed. When people asked why she'd left specialized training, she gave the standard answer: didn't work out, wrong fit. The team at Fort Stewart was decent enough. The work was boring but necessary. Emma spent her days managing inventory spreadsheets and her evenings trying to figure out what came next. 3 months into her new assignment, a letter arrived through internal channels. No return address, just a single page. The battlefield remembers. NC. She kept it in her locker, looking at it sometimes when the routine became overwhelming. 6 months in, she received new orders. Report to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for evaluation by an unnamed Special Operations Unit. No details provided. Her platoon sergeant looked at the orders with confusion. Halstead, what the hell did you do to get this? I have no idea, Sergeant. But she did know. Someone had remembered. Someone had kept their word. 18 months after washing out of winter warfare school, Emma stood in a different kind of training environment. The location was classified, the unit unnamed, the training program designed for personnel who didn't fit traditional molds but possessed specialized skills the military needed. Week 3 broke her. She wasn't the only one there who'd failed conventional paths. There was a former Marine who'd washed out of Scout Sniper School but could read weather patterns like literature. An Air Force tactical controller who'd failed physical requirements but could coordinate complex operations in his sleep. A Navy corpsman who'd been dismissed from SEAL medical training but had saved 6 lives during an undocumented operation in Syria. They were building something new here. A capability that recognized that warfare was changing, that technology couldn't replace human observation and adaptation, that the soldiers who didn't fit the mold might be exactly what was needed for missions the mold couldn't account for. Commander Cross ran the program. He'd left his SEAL team to develop this initiative, putting his career on the line for the belief that the military was measuring the wrong things in the wrong people. On a cold morning in January, snow falling across the North Carolina pine forest, Emma watched a new batch of candidates arrive. They looked lost, uncertain, some of them carrying the weight of recent failures. One woman in particular caught her attention. She moved wrong, hesitant, apologetic. She'd probably just washed out of something, probably thought she didn't belong here. Emma walked over, boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Private," she said. "You look like you're waiting for someone to tell you to leave." The woman nodded miserably. "I failed Ranger School. Twice. I don't know why they sent me here. Because someone saw what you can do instead of what you can't." Emma held out her hand. "I'm Emma Halstead. I failed Winter Warfare School. Then I led a SEAL team through a whiteout and helped extract a CIA asset from hostile territory." The woman stared at her. That's not possible." The obstacle course looked manageable on paper. Walls, nets, rope climbs, low crawls under barbed wire, standard infantry challenges. But at -20 degrees, rope turned slick with ice, gloves couldn't grip properly, and muscles seized if you stopped moving for more than a few seconds. It wasn't supposed to be. But Commander Cross doesn't care about what's supposed to be possible. He cares about what is possible. She pointed toward the training facility. In there, they're going to test you on things you're probably bad at. Then they're going to find what you're good at and build around that. It's going to be harder than anything you've done before. And at the end, most people still won't understand what you do or why you matter. Then why do it? Emma looked up at the snow falling through the pines, remembering another storm, another moment when everything could have gone wrong but didn't. Because when it matters most, when the weather's too bad and the terrain's too rough and the technology doesn't work, someone needs to be able to read the land and find the way through. That's us. That's what we do. The woman straightened slightly. "I don't even know your name." "Emma. And yours?" "Private Kate Morrison." "Any relation to Lieutenant Morrison, the SEAL?" "My cousin. He's the one who recommended me for this program. Said I reminded him of someone he met in Alaska." Emma had strong upper body mechanics. She could do 20 pull-ups in garrison conditions. Here, after 3 hours of constant movement in freezing wind, her arms simply quit. She'd hung from the rope wall, unable to make her hands close, until Sergeant Monroe ordered her down. Emma smiled. "Your cousin's a good judge of character. Come on, let's get you checked in." They walked through the snow together. 2 soldiers who'd failed the tests designed for everyone else, toward a program built specifically for people like them. Above them, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, promising more snow. But Emma knew storms now, knew how to read them, navigate through them, use them for cover when necessary. She'd washed out of winter warfare school. She'd received a combat order from a SEAL commander. And she'd discovered that failure was only permanent if you accepted someone else's definition of success. The snow kept falling, the way it always did in winter. But now Emma understood that the cold wasn't the enemy. It was just another element to read, another variable to account for. She'd learned to stand firm in storms that would have broken her before, and now she was teaching others to do the same. "Halstead's done," someone said behind her. Private Rodriguez, a former college linebacker who moved through snow like it was his natural element. "She's been done since week 1. They're just being nice." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to prove them wrong. Instead, she'd spent that evening in the latrine, crying as quietly as possible while hot water from the sink thawed her frozen fingers. The pain of warming tissue hurt worse than the cold itself. By week 4, even the instructors stopped pushing her. They'd seen hundreds of recruits come through. They knew the pattern. Some people weren't built for extreme cold weather operations, no matter how hard they tried. But Emma saw things others missed. Fall out, Halstead. During a night navigation exercise, when half the platoon got turned around in a whiteout, Emma had found the checkpoint by reading the wind patterns through the trees. She couldn't articulate how she knew just that the way snow accumulated on the northern sides of trunks created a pattern, a flow she could follow. No one noticed. They were too busy watching her struggle with the physical demands. On a land navigation course, she'd identified a shortcut the instructors hadn't marked, a frozen creek bed that shaved 20 minutes off the standard route. She'd tried to explain it to her squad leader, but he'd dismissed her. "Stick to the known paths, Halstead." She did, and she failed. The problem wasn't that Emma couldn't operate in winter conditions. The problem was that she operated differently, and the standardized evaluation system had no way to measure it. Emma hadn't come to Alaska by choice. She'd come because of a promise made over a flag-draped coffin in Portland, Oregon, 14 months earlier. Her older brother, Staff Sergeant David Halstead, had died during a training accident in Afghanistan. Not in combat, that would have been easier somehow. He'd died because a faulty communications relay had delayed medevac response by 18 minutes after a vehicle rollover. At the funeral, Emma's father, a retired Army colonel, had said nothing. Her mother had wept. Emma had stood in the rain, watching water run off the polished surface of the casket, and made a decision. She'd enlisted the following week. Her father tried to talk her out of it. "You're doing this for the wrong reasons," he'd said. "Grief isn't a qualification." Sergeant Monroe didn't look at her as he said it. He didn't need to. Everyone at Fort Richardson knew what 3 failures meant in winter qualification. "Neither was David's death," she'd replied. She'd breezed through basic training, survived AIT, and volunteered for winter warfare school because David had always talked about wanting to earn that qualification. He'd never gotten the chance. Now she was failing to honor even that. The night before Commander Cross arrived, Emma had walked out to the edge of the training area where the forest met the cleared grounds. Snow fell in huge, lazy flakes, the kind that only happens when the temperature rises slightly, approaching survivable. She'd stood there for an hour, not thinking, just watching. The way moonlight caught the ice crystals, the subtle differences in shadow that indicated depth and danger, the wind that carried information if you knew how to listen. She wasn't weak. She knew that. But knowing didn't matter if the system measuring you couldn't see your strengths. Commander Nathan Cross had earned his Trident 17 years ago. He'd operated in 12 countries, run missions that would never appear in official records, and developed a reputation for seeing potential where others saw liability. He'd arrived at Fort Richardson on routine business, evaluating candidates for a classified training pipeline. Winter warfare school fed into several special operations career paths. Cross typically spent a week observing, then submitted his recommendations. He'd been there for 4 days when he first noticed Private Halstead. She'd been struggling through a patrol exercise, moving too slowly, breathing too hard. By every measurable standard, she was failing. But Cross watched how she moved when she thought no one was paying attention. The other recruits filed past, some avoiding her eyes, others smirking. Private Chen muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Told you she wouldn't make it past January." Between exercises, when other soldiers checked their gear or complained about the cold, Halstead studied the terrain. She'd kneel in the snow, run her hand along the surface, look at the tree line with an intensity Cross recognized. She was reading the environment, building a map in her head. During a break, Cross approached Sergeant Monroe. "The one who keeps washing out," Cross said. "Halstead. What's her problem?" Monroe shrugged. Can't hack it, sir. Good attitude, poor execution. We'll probably cycle her back to regular infantry. Show me her land nav scores. Monroe pulled up the records on his tablet. She's inconsistent. Sometimes hits the checkpoints early, other times way off course. Which times is she off course? When she doesn't follow the recommended routes. Cross looked at the data more carefully. Every time Halstead had deviated from standard paths, she'd actually found faster routes, but she'd been marked down for not following instructions. When she followed the approved routes, she struggled with the pace. I want to run her through a scenario, Cross said. Emma pushed herself upright, legs threatening to give out. Her lungs burned from breathing Arctic air for 6 straight hours. The thermometer outside the barracks read -18, not counting wind chill. Sir, she's about to be dropped. Unofficial. Tomorrow morning, 0400. Just her. I'll handle the after-action. Monroe knew better than to argue with a SEAL commander. The next morning, Emma reported to a section of forest she'd never trained in. Commander Cross waited beside a tactical vehicle. No other personnel visible. Halstead, he said. You have 2 hours to locate 3 caches I've hidden in a 12-square-kilometer area. Map and compass only. No GPS. Report back here with contents. Sir, aye. Clock's running. Emma moved into the darkness, snow crunching under her boots. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood orders. 2 hours later, she returned with all 3 caches. Cross checked his watch. She'd done it in 97 minutes. How'd you find the third one, he asked. It was 300 meters off any logical search grid. She'd washed out. The ravens, sir. Ravens. They were circling something. I figured you'd put bait near the cache to create a marker. Caribou jerky. That's what was in the bag. Cross studied her for a long moment. You didn't pass the test, Private. You understood the mission. That's different. He drove them back to base in silence. Then, instead of dropping her at the barracks, he took her to the briefing room. You're being pulled from the course, Cross said. Emma's stomach dropped. Yes, sir. Because you're needed somewhere else. The official notice came through at 1,100 hours. Private Emma Halstead, removed from training due to failure to meet minimum standards. Reassignment pending. The barracks erupted in barely suppressed satisfaction. Chen actually laughed. Told you, she was never going to make it. Metal scraped against metal as the admin building door swung open. A figure emerged through the curtain of falling snow, navy parka crusted white, boots leaving deep prints in the fresh powder. The man moved with the kind of economy that comes from operating in hostile environments. Nothing wasted, everything measured. Rodriguez was more tactful. Tough break, Halstead. Maybe try something indoors next time. Emma packed her gear in silence. She'd expected this, prepared for it. The failure still burned, but at least it was over. At 1,400 hours, a different set of orders arrived. Emma was to report to the classified operations building at the north end of the base. Immediately, full winter kit. She walked across the compound in confusion, passing soldiers who stared at her departure with curiosity. The Class Ops building was off limits to anyone without specific clearance. She'd never been inside. The guard at the door checked her ID twice before letting her through. Commander Cross waited in a briefing room with 5 other men. All of them wore Navy uniforms. All of them had the trident. Gentlemen, Cross said, this is Private Halstead. She'll be accompanying us on the insertion. The silence that followed felt dangerous. A senior chief named Garrett spoke first. Sir, with respect, what the hell are you talking about? She failed out of winter course this morning, another SEAL said. Lieutenant Morrison, according to his name tape. You want to bring a failed Army trainee on a mission? Commander Nathan Cross stopped 3 paces from where Sergeant Monroe stood at attention. She didn't fail, Cross said. The course failed to measure what she can do. This isn't a charity operation, Commander. No, it's a high-value target extraction in deteriorating weather conditions with hostile forces likely in the area, which is why I need someone who can read terrain the way Halstead can. Garrett leaned forward. We have satellite imagery. We have drones. We have technology that doesn't work when there's 3 feet of snow falling per hour and wind speeds hit 50 knots, Cross interrupted. I watched her find 3 hidden caches in under 2 hours in terrain she'd never seen, using nothing but observation. How many of you could do that? No one answered. She goes, Cross said. Mission brief in 30 minutes. When the room cleared, only Morrison remained. He looked at Emma with something between pity and contempt. You know what you just walked into? He asked quietly. No, sir.